Greetings, everyone. Joining me on today's Next Gen North podcast is Professor Grahame Webb. Grahame can be considered a leading authority on crocodiles, not just domestically, but internationally, and is a proponent of the sustainable management of wildlife, and is also a leading entrepreneur. In this episode, Grahame takes us through his love for wildlife, the history of croc culling in the NT, and how humans and crocodiles can coexist sustainably. We hope you enjoy this episode. All right, well, Professor Grahame Webb, thank you for joining us on the Next Gen North podcast.
Oh, my pleasure.
I understand it's under some duress. I understand you've had some back surgery recently.
Yeah.
How have you pulled up after surgery?
Fantastic.
Yeah?
I mean, it was urgently needed and zoop, was just fixed.
Yep.
Terrific.
So you're on the mend?
On the mend, well and truly.
Very good. So I understand that you're perhaps the leading expert globally on crocodiles. Is that how you see things, or you take a more humble approach?
People tend, a bit more humble, but people tend to look at me as something of a global expert on crocodiles.
Yeah. But your journey didn't actually start in the Territory, did it?
No. I was born in Sydney and went, I guess, about 1959, 58, Mum and Dad bought a property out in central New South Wales. So we moved out there, and that was just great for me. It was terrific, And then I went from there I went to school in Sydney, to Hurlston Agricultural High School. It was mainly for country kids.
Right.
I went from there to the University of New England, and it was a strange thing because I went originally to do agriculture there, or rural science, as it was called. But to be quite honest, when I realised you could do zoology and work with wildlife, I always just assumed that was something you had to do on the weekends. Like when you're a country kid, everyone goes fishing and hunting, and
Right.
And it's like a weekend or an after-work type. When I realised that you could become a zoologist and study animals and somehow be paid for it, I just thought, well, this is for me. This is, I probably had ADHD for all my life, but it's the sort of thing so I got right into zoology and zoological research I liked, and I met some fantastic people there that had come over. It was very formal when I went to university. You used to have to wear a gown to every lecture and a little bar. I don't know whether you're a 1 year or a 2 year or a 3 year.
Okay.
And everything was very formal with your lectures and things. And this guy arrived from the US, Hal Heatwell, who was just, there's only one of, and he was the exact opposite. He just, everyone was part of his family type of thing, and I must have driven him crazy, of course, but he really opened so many doors for me to just really get stuck into going on trips, and I was seeking experience all the time. Anything that would come up, I would just volunteer for or go or help organise. So I went on trips all over the place.
Yep.
And, I remember one time I volunteered on some expedition to some island. I didn't think about it. And then I finally got an answer. I thought it was on the Barrier Reef somewhere. I thought this would be good, Then I got a message from Antarctic Division that I'd been selected, and so I went down to Macquarie Island working on seals and penguins
Oh, wow.
for 3 or 4 months. And that was a tremendous experience, in 1967, I think. And so by the time I finished my PhD, I finished in 72, but it was granted in 73. I was pretty experienced at, not only did I have the sort of the rural thing, rural people to me are just fantastic. When you're on a property and something goes wrong, it's no good if a PowerPoint doesn't work, you can't very well ring up some electrician to come out 100 miles, to fix it. You've got to fix it yourself.
Sure.
And so I had that. It didn't matter what went wrong. You had a good chance of fixing it if you looked at it carefully. And I had that type of ability.
Right.
And so, I was pretty well equipped. And at that time, a program had started up here in the north, looking at crocodiles through the University of Sydney, through Professor Harry Messel had started it. And he was a physicist, University of Sydney, and quite an eminent guy, most unusual guy. You could, very unusual guy. But they really needed a field biologist up on this program. And so they advertised, and I applied, and I got the job, so that I was up here in May 1973. And I'd worked mainly with reptiles and amphibians, frogs. Mm-hmm. But I'd already worked out that although there'd been very little formal research done on crocodiles during the hunting period, mm-hmm. which went from, say, intense hunting from start of 1946 to 1971 when they were protected, there was very little research had been done.
Right.
But you could work out very quickly that you couldn't really study the biology of crocodiles with a canoe and a pair of binoculars. You needed resources.
Okay.
Because they range from 50 or 60 grams up to 1,000 kilograms, and so this program had those resources. It was an unbelievable program. There'll never be one like it again, I don't think, unless someone, some real entrepreneur with lots of money gets involved. But so I was at home with that program because we had the resources to do the basic research. Now, of course, at that time, there were not that many crocodiles around, especially bigger crocodiles. There were hatchlings and 1-year-olds starting to appear.
Right.
But so I was able to get right into all sorts of research with this sort of backing. And so my idea was to get in, do a few years working on that, and then move to something else. I didn't intend to stay working with crocodiles
right.
for the rest of my life. But it came at a time when the whole conservation paradigm was changing worldwide, and suddenly crocodiles were becoming more and more important globally, and people were... I was one of the few people that had been able to work in the field and get a real understanding of how crocodiles operated.
Right.
And there was a program in Louisiana on alligators that was just excellent, and there's another program was developing in Zimbabwe that was excellent. Had some excellent people, and our program basically, which was so well resourced, and I ended up I couldn't get out. When I left that program, I joined as a consultant. There wasn't any university here at that time.
Right.
The government, the then Conservation Commission of the Northern Territory, that was a fantastic institution, and I was able to work then on freshwater crocodiles. So I'd worked on saltwater crocodiles, and all the lessons and mistakes I'd made, I was able to correct them with the freshwater crocodiles. So I had 2 species. There's about 28 species worldwide.
And what are the main differences between the two?
Between salties?
Yeah.
Well, saltwater crocodiles are one of the biggest of the crocodiles. It's partly because they've got a longer tail too. Their body is probably not that much bigger than Nile crocodiles and some of the others. But
I'll just get you to move that mic up just a touch,
Yeah,
Grahame, if you don't mind.
they're
Yeah, that's great.
saltwater crocodiles are big and they're dangerous. You can't sugarcoat it. What I mean, they're a serious predator, and we're now that crocodiles are recovering in various places, especially here. You're seeing just how you've really got to be careful with saltwater crocodiles. Freshwater crocodiles are unique to Australia. They're little narrow snouted things. They're more like their snouts more like I often think more like chopsticks when they pick something up.
Right.
And so they're not really dangerous to people. They can bite like hell, but they don't get that big normally. In some areas they do, but a lot of areas they're quite small, under 2 metres. So they're a completely different animal. The saltwater crocodiles are a mound nesting animal. They have a long nesting period during the wet season. They put their eggs in a big mound of vegetation and mud and dirt. Whereas freshwater crocodiles dig a hole like sea turtles in the sand and, completely different nesting. So they nest in the dry season, salties nests in the wet season. They're completely different. Yeah. But having the two of them put me in a class that not that many people had ventured into. So I was really lucky. And so I guess the problem then became what when they started to recover, you could see the writing on the wall very, very quickly. Like they take a long time to mature. They take maybe 15 years to mature. But during the surveys, especially in tidal rivers, you can see the hatchlings, the 1-year-olds, the 2-year-olds, the 3-year-olds, the 4-year-olds. So you can see them increasing all the time.
Right.
Whereas with things like sea turtles, they usually monitor them on nesting beaches. Well, a massive recovery has taken place before the numbers of nesting females will start to increase.
Right.
So, but with crocodiles, you could see this all happening. So we could see by the end of the 1970s, we could see that, we're just going to have a real big problem here because even though they were juveniles, the crocs starting to get up into the 2 to 3 metres, and people were seeing more crocodiles than they'd seen since the 1940s.
Yep.
And the paradigm at the time was, no, these are endangered animals, a bit like sea turtles. You probably can't fit another sea turtle into the Northern Territory. They're recovered,
right.
And they've never really been so depleted. But the image of an endangered species opens doors for funding and things like this. And so with crocodiles, we had a problem because we could see them recovering. We could see there's going to have to be real, if we're going to recover the population, that it, do you want me to?
Yeah, sure. You can answer that one.
Well, I'll switch it on.
Yep.
So I'll just go back to that part. You sort of got to go back a little bit to understand this. But in the 1960s, between the end of the Second World War and the 1960s, it was a period of economic boom around the world. People were mining, forestry, there was fisheries, there was everything, you know. A lot of economic activity. And people weren't really giving that much attention to the impact on the environment, wildlife and things like that. And the turning point in my mind was when the IUCN, which at that time was the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources that had been set up in the late 1940s, it started publishing the red data list. Suddenly scientists were saying, look, this species is in trouble globally. The original concept was to identify the species that were in global risk of going extinct from whatever. Massive utilisation was one. And remember, sea turtles were being harvested for meat and oil and fat. Crocodiles were being harvested for their skins. And without a doubt, crocodiles had been excessively harvested around the world.
Right.
Nobody cared. You see, the social licence of the day, there's just been the Second World War, 60 million people killed. And who was interested in crocodiles?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, everyone knew that saltwater crocodiles were just a pest.
Yep.
And the social licence of the day was, wow, get rid of them. And you can sell the skin too. Fantastic. You can get economic development in, like at wartime in the Northern Territory, there's only 2,000 people up here. So the fact that you could get some sort of new industry up here was welcomed.
Yep.
And nobody thought about, well, what happens if could you make them extinct or would they go extinct? But by the 60s, it was pretty obvious the numbers had been cut right back.
What sort of numbers were they?
Well, we think that the original population was somewhere around 100,000.
Okay.
And so as they started to hunt them, they took the easy ones sort of first, the ones that were readily available in tidal rivers and things.
Territorial.
Well, it's just access, because you could go down a river with muddy banks and shoot as many crocodiles as you could skin, which may be up to 20.
Right.
And we looked at the history very closely because a lot of misnomers get created about how abundant were they originally. And people thought, oh, there used to be millions. But there wasn't millions. When you looked at we interviewed, I think, 60 people that had been hunters or traders in 1984. It was very clear that the original densities were highly river specific.
Right.
There were some rivers in which they were abundant, like the Alligator Rivers region, the Mary River, the Adelaide River, Daly River. But there were a lot of rivers and a lot of little creeks that didn't have many crocodiles.
Is that right?
And that was becoming very apparent in the recovery. The same thing was establishing itself by the end of the 70s, that they were abundant in some rivers and not in others. Now,
is that just because of the amount of biomass, or what's?
No, I think it's to do with the habitat and food availability, and it's a little bit complex to unravel as to why it is. But to give you an example, in 1979-80, we worked in the Mary River. We camped during the wet season. It was the worst field work we've ever done, I think. And we worked over the Mary River with airboat catching and marking crocodiles, mainly freshwater crocodiles.
Because that would have been around the year that they built the barrage there, wasn't it? The concrete barrage, was that about
down at Shady Camp?
At Shady Camp,
I'm not sure.
Or were you up a bit higher?
We were up higher. We were up at Hardy's Creek.
Right.
But we were operating all the way down.
Yep.
And it was flooded a lot. But that whole trip, we were out there 2 or 3 months, and we saw 3 salties in the Mary River the whole time. They were gone. They'd been cleaned out. The buffalo were everywhere. And they'd cleaned all the edge vegetation. You just came up on the edge of those billabongs and there was just a muddy bank.
Wow.
All that vegetation on the edge was gone.
So they were just destroying habitat?
Well, the buffalo were destroying the habitat. The plains during the dry season were just the footmarks of the buffalo going down, maybe 30 centimetres. Just the whole plain was covered in that.
Right.
And so to drive over it during the dry season, you used to have to go in sort of low range first gear or something, and you do it, or you could go really fast. You know, you could
Bounce
across
over
the
them.
top. Yeah.
Yep.
And salties were gone, and I think the recovery of salties in the Mary River didn't really take place until the sort of mid-1980s.
Wow.
And I think it was from an overflow from Kakadu, animals coming out of Kakadu back into the Mary River.
Yep.
And it started to build up very, very rapidly. And then it built up to, you know, in the lower reaches of the Mary, some of the highest density saltwater crocodiles known. You know, they're very, very abundant now.
Well, if I may just quickly, I remember my uncle, so he was an old copper back in the day. He used to tell me stories about him swimming across the river at Shady Camp, catching a bunch of fish, tethering them around his neck, and then swimming back across the river to his car and driving home. Unheard of these days.
Well, and that's, by the end of the 70s, that type of complacency, there hadn't been a crocodile attack up here that we were aware of, I think, since the 1950s. So the 1960s, there were no attacks, and there weren't any in the 1970s until the end of the 1970s. And so the complacency had come. People would drive out, and remember, there was no bridge over the Adelaide River in those times. You used to have to go right upstream and cross over and come back.
Wow.
But people would swim in every river. Nobody bothered about, nobody was sort of worried. I remember talking to Marshall Perrin, and he was saying they used to go snorkeling and spearfishing all in amongst the mangroves and things like this in those days because the crocodiles were gone.
Just the done
They'd
thing.
been reduced by, 99% or something. That they were in about 73 or 74. I remember I flew in a light aircraft over a lot of the rivers in the north and didn't see one crocodile. You could see the occasional track on the mud of some wary old crocodile that was hidden away. So what had happened was there was the crocs were distributed in the tidal rivers and the main rivers and in the freshwater swamps associated with those rivers.
Right.
Now, they were the hardest crocs to get because working in those areas was very, very tough for hunters. You know, you really had to be skilled and dedicated. Guys like Ray Petherick were concentrated on those areas. And so you had a nucleus of crocs, wary adults hidden away. They were nesting and they were producing hatchlings that would find their way into the river, but then they would be picked up for stuffed animals or allowed to get to a certain size and then be taken. So that the Adelaide River was wiped out of crocs. I can remember in 1980 in February, which is the peak of the saltwater crocodile nesting season, flying both sides of the river, and we found 2 nests in the whole river by 1980. That's 9 years after protection. But then we found this little swamp, and we saw 8 nests in this little swamp, and that's what was happening. These little nucleuses of animals that were just in areas that were just almost impossible to hunt in.
Right.
Was where they survived, and they're tremendous survivors. Crocs are. What you learn, people go into conservation thinking everything's so fragile. But I tell you, crocodiles are just tenacious survivors, and that's why they're still with us. You can knock them back, something ferocious, but if their habitat's largely intact, as it was here, even though the buffalo had caused a lot of damage, they have this capacity to populate. Now, saltwater crocodiles have 50 eggs, and a lot of those get lost to flooding and other things, but it means that they've got the capacity. You've got 2 crocodiles, and so you might get 15 or 20 hatchlings out. Well, that's a massive rate of increase.
Right.
And then, of course, there's mortality on them, but then they get to 1-year-olds, and then 2-year-olds, and then 3-year-olds. And so each successive year you could see these age cohorts building. And I guess 1979, 1980 was the real turning point because we had 2 fatal attacks.
Okay.
We had 2 non-fatal attacks, one of which was very, very serious. And then we just had self-government up here. We had the Tourist Commission trying to promote the Northern Territory, like, hello, we're up here. And especially fishing was a big deal. And then so Sweetheart, this big male crocodile, started attacking fishing boats. And so that crocodiles very rapidly became persona non grata.
Right.
You know, people said, well, how many do you want? You know, because people were seeing more crocodiles than they'd seen since the 1940s, but they were still largely teenagers. Even the bigger ones, like males, got to get about 3.1 metres before they mature. You know, the females can mature at maybe 2.1, 2.2.
Okay.
And so, but it takes 15 years basically for that all to take place. So,
and are they man-eaters at that size, in your opinion, 3.1?
3.1 is, yeah.
Yep.
Like the males, the biggest males.
Sure.
Can certainly attack people and will attack people.
Yep.
You know, but I guess the problem was just people had become so complacent, and all the people would water ski up the Adelaide River and swim across all the rivers, and nobody would care at all about if you got your lure stuck. You just dive in and get it. And
I've heard those
swim
stories.
in the rivers, and so it was, to the Conservation Commission's credit, they really addressed this public safety thing about 1980, 79, 80, full on.
Right.
It was realised that you just had to change this paradigm. And at that time, people... Like, conservation is a funny field. You get something like a predator, proud and strong and predator, and people try to make it, well, they're not really predators. They only attack people if you go near their nest, which is just complete nonsense.
Right.
These things are serious predators. And so the programs that were brought in about that time, there were television ads telling people,
So it was public awareness.
Huge public awareness thing to, rangers went round, or ourselves, or others went round to every school, every class, and took crocodiles where people could hold them and handle them. And I remember we had one little crocodile that was, if they're incubated at the wrong temperature, you can suddenly get spina bifida, where this little one, Bentley, we used to call him. He was just so popular with the kids. But we'd also have big skulls there and just show people what these things can do, that these are serious predators. And, of course, we were criticised for that, for being inflammatory.
Right. What, stoking fear and all that?
Yeah. Well, changing the paradigm.
Yep.
You're supposed to have all this sympathy for... it's a bit like victims of domestic violence, that suddenly the victims... The one that's made the mistake,
right? Victim blaming.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's a very similar sort of paradigm, and you got all these reasons why the person, attacked his wife or something. But she somehow, and she gets to feel that way. Oh well, I know he doesn't like barbecue sauce, and I put it on his hot dog, and it's my fault.
Sure.
It's sort of a strange thing. But anyway, we stuck to our guns, and the Conservation Commission at that time, Goffletz, who was one of the fathers of self-government up here, he was in charge of the Conservation Commission. He was a remarkable guy, a great politician, everything else. So public awareness was a huge thing. They started a crocodile farm, which was it was largely to do with tourism, but with a long-term goal of production. And the third thing was a problem crocodile program,
Right.
because that was the hard decision, but it was very quickly realised that the worst thing that can happen, not just for people, but for the future prospects of conservation, was an attack on people.
Right.
So hard decisions were made, like any crocodile in Darwin Harbour would just be taken out. And that's ongoing. Like we take out, the government takes out something like 250 crocodiles a year out of Darwin Harbour. They move in and they in other words, we try to make them extinct in Darwin Harbour, but we can't do it.
Okay.
Because the populations on the outside are high and they keep moving in. So the farming was part of, and to my way of thinking at least, was part of an economic strategy. That what I personally started to realise that although I personally was interested in the archosaurial ancestry of crocs, like I love to see crocs in the wild, but my values were not the values that you could expect the public to accept.
Right.
Maybe in a couple of 100 years they might, but I doubt even then they will, because, humans have had an evolutionary right to avoid being eaten by predators, since the monkeys first climbed out of the first trees.
Right.
And so the only thing that I could see that could work, which followed the Louisiana model, was to make crocodiles as valuable as you could economically to as many people as you could in as many diverse ways as you could.
Yep.
And so we started to proceed in that direction. So, for example, the Adelaide River, where a guy had started feeding the crocs there, my first reaction was, that can't be right, But then I remember talking to Marshall Perrin about it, and Marshall was, in my opinion, a very wise chief minister, and he made me realise it was actually the best thing for public education.
Right.
Was to show those jumping crocodiles, because people would get, in a little 12-foot boat and go right up the river with mum, dad, the dog, the kids. And well, that stopped overnight with these ads. And so it was doing more for public education than everything the Commission was doing at the time, because here it was, you were confronted by it.
Yep.
And that's continued on, for the last 50 years type of thing, and it's uniquely territory-based. It's brought us millions and millions of dollars worth of television exposure around the world, the jumping crocodiles.
Yep.
And so it's been a good thing for public safety. So I guess this whole thing started to grow, then the economic thing, with landowners being the first people that we tried to make sure benefited.
Right.
And Aboriginal people in particular, because a lot of the nesting areas are on Aboriginal lands,
Right.
about 60 or 70%. And the program was brought in, it's a very safe program, a ranching program, where you could collect wild eggs that had a very low probability of surviving and incubate them, hatch them, raise them, and then sell skins and meat and other things. So
Sure.
this whole industry sort of developed from those days. And it's gone up and down. There's been all sorts of challenges here and there, because it's very hard to compete on an international level
Right.
with crocs. But I would say that, the people in the industry today are very sharp, got their finger right on the the thing, and that industry is really very successful. It's attracted investment now because we've got such a strong conservation credentials,
Right.
because we've done what very few people can do with a predator.
Yep.
See, when you're faced with a conservation problem, it's usually with predators. It's usually a highly depleted population.
Okay.
So you start off, as we did in 1971 with protection, with the goal being to rebuild the population or to see whether you could rebuild it. There was some question in the minds of some people whether it could be rebuilt. But once it is rebuilt, that conservation problem's over. The next problem is if you rebuild a population of predators, they're going to start eating people again. Then everyone's going to want to get rid of them again.
Sure.
So you have to change the focus to a management program in which complicates things because there's so many more stakeholders involved.
Right.
If you just have pure protection, you've got some rangers going around stopping people doing this and that. But as soon as you open up a management program, the number of stakeholders increases exponentially.
Right.
And the number of variables increase. Mm-hmm. So a management program that operates with sustainable use, as this program does, there's not much in the way of harvest, but there's a lot of egg harvest. Mm-hmm. That becomes very complicated. But it's worked exceptionally well, and it's held up now as an example all around the world of a program that has tackled a big problem, conserving a depleted population of predators.
Yep.
And we've achieved great success. And, that's due to successive governments. And they've been hot and cold on the thing. Sometimes you get someone that's like Goffletz. It was totally supportive of the whole paradigm that we were trying to achieve. But then you get other directors that come in that just hate the whole use thing, and so you just got to wait till they screw things up and get shifted on, and then someone else comes in, and then you get all sorts of if you actually chart the history of keeping everyone on track with this thing, it's an interesting history in its own right that one day will be written about, I'm sure. But what we've achieved is very good. The public is very much on side. I think most people see crocodiles as a real asset. Mm-hmm. The fact that we have these recovered populations means that film companies and documentaries internationally want to come here to film crocodiles. They're circulating all around the world. I get calls all around the world from people say, "Oh God, we were just doing the dishes in Louisiana and we heard your voice," It's given us tremendous exposure, paying its own way.
Yep.
And that's probably one of the biggest benefits to the territory of having our recovered population. Now, because the public, this issue of, should we cull crocodiles? That comes up all the time, every 5 or 6 years.
Yep.
Someone will come up, and it's usually a political decision, something of a knee-jerk reaction.
Is that usually due to an attack, or is it political?
Sometimes it is. It's usually in the wake of some sort of attack or some bite or something. But I don't know. People get in each other's ears, and the thing is that wildlife management, is a very complex thing. It's a science in its own right. It's an art and a science. There's so many variables interacting that it's very complex. And so for someone just to say, I think they should cull the crocodiles, well, that's great, but they don't understand all the little bits and pieces. And
right. Well, can you explain that? So, if with the culling back on the agenda, if there was, say, a trophy hunting program or something like that rolled out by the government, can you explain?
Well, I don't have a problem with that. Because I think the problem with trophy hunting is the federal government.
Right.
The federal government's inundated with NGOs, non-government organisations that are opposed to eating meat and everything else.
Right.
And so they, oh, God, this will be terrible. But in actual fact, it's not terrible. If you're a landowner and you have crocodiles on your property, if you can sell one of those and get $10,000 for it or something,
Yep.
well, guess what? You're going to start looking at the next one, you know.
Same way.
The same way.
Yep.
Suddenly you turn them from, as soon as you have to put down on your tax return income earned from crocodiles,
Yep.
it changes the perception to the landowners. Landowners are the people at the front line of this. It's not you and me sitting here doing a podcast.
Sure.
You know, it's
Yep.
the people that are out there.
Yep.
And the more money they can make from crocodiles, the better.
So does that go back to your ethos to save an animal, create a value for it? Is that sort of how you
Yeah, I don't think that to save some animals, giving them an economic value
Yep.
is one of the only tools you've got in the toolbox.
Right.
Because you're not going to get people to love crocodiles. What I mean, you know, who wants to get in bed and cuddle a crocodile? You know, some people do, but I mean, you can't. Like, you know, when the first primates climbed out of the first trees down onto the land and started to run around the land, go for a drink at the billabong, they got chased away or eaten by a crocodile. We've been dealing with crocodiles throughout the whole evolutionary history of people because a lot of it all happened in the equatorial parts of Africa.
Right.
And so the earliest primates have had to deal with it. And they've learnt to steal eggs and stuff like this from the crocodiles, but it's a pretty bit of brinkmanship involved. And so, okay, we've come a long way since then, but I think I believe these things are imprinted on us. You can take when you're looking at a crocodile in like at Crocodile's Park, where you see people stand over a crocodile and look at them, and the crocodile turns around, lifts its head up, and just opens its mouth a little bit. You just know that well, this rings bells. Nothing to do with modern man. This rings bells from 20 million years ago or something. You know that it's ingrained in us. So you can fight that if you want to fight that. You know, you can have a big platform. You know, but it's not going to work. There's no way that you're going to convince everybody that crocodiles their intrinsic value is so high. And, you know, everyone runs around saying, well, they're ecologically really important. You say, okay. There was just a big paper where we looked at all these ecological benefits.
Right.
And none of them really stack up in science. People are striving to find reasons other than their commercial value to want, but you've only got to go back and you say, okay, well, if they're so valuable, what happened when we reduced the populations by 98, 99%? Like, what happened? Did all the mangroves collapse? Did all the water lilies disappear? Did all the ducks and fish and crabs? Well, when you talk to people from that era, nothing happened.
Right.
So you just got to accept the fact that crocodiles don't eat very much. You know, like a big crocodile, 4-metre crocodile can survive eating one chicken a week. You get fat eating one chicken a week. You know, they go a long time without feeding, and they'll eat. They might find a dead something or other, and they'll eat that, and that'll do them for a while. They don't eat very much, so it's not like a pig or a cow or a dog that you've got to feed every day and they're burning up all this energy.
Sure.
They're very, very efficient. They don't eat very much. And they just don't have a real big impact. Now, there's all sorts of people trying to prove this wrong, but in a recent paper with a stack of authors from the Crocodile Specialist Group, genuine scientists and people that have strived to find the truth, it's very difficult to actually find the ecological reasons that are truly compelling.
Yep.
Like you can come up with anything and the public will perhaps believe it because they don't understand the complexities of it. But there's not much. There's not much. So while they're striving to do that, we've got to find reasons for people, for the public to value what we've got. Right. It's an amazing achievement. And for me personally, it's a huge number of headaches, of course, getting the progress of this into where it is today. But it's something that I feel we've just done the right thing. The territory, it's been innovative, it's been bold, it's the territory doing things in a way that's suited to the territory. And I think these things are far more important than a lot of other people. Like, we don't have fishing licences, we don't have boat licences. Right. We don't need all that stuff down here. Now, people get employed up here, from down south. Oh, well, you don't have boat licence? Oh, we've got to change that. You're feeding crocodiles? Oh, God. And even they say, you mean you're taking little crocodiles around to schools with a rubber band on their snout? Oh, God, that's terrible. We've got to stop that. Well, we're the territory. We're quite different. We're still very much a frontier place, and that's one of our strongest assets. If we want to be like a little Sydney or a little Melbourne with everyone, it took us millions of years to climb out of the trees onto the ground, and now what have we done? We've built big concrete trees in the cities where people are back up in the bloody trees again. They're out of touch with nature completely. They might have the right feelings, but they don't understand what it's like to be in nature. Look, because Aboriginal people in this area are just unbelievable. I was really fortunate from 73 to 76 in particular to be working out of Maningrida. And at that time, they were traditional people. Like that settlement had only started in the 50s.
Right.
And people had only come out of the bush in the 50s and 60s. Boy, they were just the best. They were the most skilled people. And that was one of the great highlights of my life was in that period. I learnt so much. When you really are with people that have become so specialised at hunting and gathering and, existing without transport other than walking. An amazing sort of period. And there's nothing to say, like, when you start saying, well, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't kill a crocodile. So what about Aboriginal people? Oh, it's okay for them to kill crocodiles. So what, we're going to have apartheid?
Right, yeah, different system.
You just got to base the thing on cold, hard science.
Right.
You can take a certain number of crocodiles and it's not going to make any difference.
So there's that evidence base now.
It's all evidence based. The egg harvest is quite extensive, but the population has not shown any sign of problems with it. If you stop the egg harvest, there'll be a lot more hatchlings and 1-year-olds, but they'll get eaten by the other crocs. Like what we learnt before the 70s was over, that once these crocs start to recover, like hatchlings seem to be taken by a bunch of different predators, but the 1-year-olds, they get taken by the bigger crocs.
Right.
And
cannibalism.
Cannibalism. And the 2-year-olds and the 3-year-olds, cannibalism and space. There seems to be, as Messel used to put it, it's as though there's a certain number of slots in the river, and if that's exceeded, then the crocs move out, and a lot of those that do move out just disappear. No one quite knows what happens to them. They don't turn up in the other rivers.
Wow.
And so there's all sorts of basic research on what happens to these animals that just hasn't been done.
Okay.
But you've got to be very pragmatic about crocodiles. They're not an animal that you can, you've got to be very careful. You start telling people, oh no, they're not really a problem. Well, they are a problem. And we deal with problems every day. We've just got to work out a way of solving it, but because the number of variables operating in a management program is so high that it's a very complex. Making the right decision is hard, and you've got to learn lessons from the past and lessons from other countries, and to try to make the right decisions most of the time. We haven't made the right decisions all the time, but the end result is we've achieved conservation-wise what we're after, we have achieved economic-wise what we're after, and we've got investment, we've got employment, we've got building, we've got set up. There's all sorts of good things that have come from the crocodile program. So it's a bit like I said to someone the other day that if you had someone doing brain surgery and they wanted to try a new method, you wouldn't put it out to the public and say, well, what method do you think they should take?
Yep.
Because you recognise that it's a specialised field and it's not something that just, you can make a political decision on the basis of what Fred said to you at the pub last night.
Yeah.
You can't. It's a very complex decision with all sorts of, it's a wicked problem, what they call, with all sorts of interactions and variables. You've got to be very cautious. So the management program that the Territory's got, which is the Territory government is responsible for, is exemplary.
Yep.
Seen as being exemplary. Well, it gives the government the flexibility to do all sorts of things to try and keep public safety and the croc populations to get as many benefits as possible. Get rid of the negative benefits and maximise the positive benefits.
So do you see that sustainable management model as the way forward? You talked about...
for crocodiles, definitely. For crocodiles, what I mean, I think it's just been shown. It's not just here. Louisiana is another place where their program has gone from strength to strength over the years.
Is that a little bit different in Louisiana because they're dealing with alligators who are less aggressive, I guess?
No, that's true. That's true. They've got so many more of them.
Yep.
And they're a different animal. Well, these animals are serious predators.
Yep.
What I mean, like East Timor, which is only 450 k away. Well, the number of people killed by crocodiles in East Timor is more than the road toll.
Wow.
They're losing, like one person killed a month or something. And
is that because they have such a demand for living by the water and feeding off the?
You're dealing with a situation in Timor-Leste that is very complicated because the traditional values of the crocodiles are seen as the grandfather of the people.
Right.
And it's the good crocodile.
Okay.
And so if a crocodile attacks someone, that person's obviously done something wrong.
Right.
And so if it's a non-fatal attack, people don't like to talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's complex to understand, but the issue that interests me a lot, and it should interest everybody, is that crocodiles are turning up at the oil rigs, between here and East Timor. And, it seems highly likely to me that crocodiles from here are contributing to the problem in Timor-Leste. Now, we've been up there trying to get DNA samples to try and work out what's going on.
So this is potentially the disappearing crocs you were referring to before?
Well, that's right. There's a lot of crocs seem to disappear, but we don't know much about the crocodile movements off the coast. There's some really odd things, but everyone seems to be worried about it from the point of view of, it's just a funny thing. There's all sorts of politics get involved because people are having a lot of influence in Timor-Leste and they don't seem to want anyone from the outside coming in and suggesting things. So it's a very complex situation. I've spoken to 2 presidents about it because the problem is that they're the grandfather of the people, but the grandfather is now eating the people.
Right.
And they've got their internal problems in trying to work out how to solve this.
Right.
you know, and the rate of attack is going up, not down. And so, it's an area where we should be able to help Timor-Leste resolve this issue more than we're doing.
Right.
You know, they can't implement a program like we've got here. You know, like across the whole budget for their wildlife department wouldn't be as much as we spend on Darwin Harbour.
Right.
So it's no good. It's no good pie in the sky stuff.
Yeah.
What we've got to do is try and tailor something to the local situation. And don't go in there, you know, with your britches up. Yes, we've got it all right. You know, we don't.
We're ready to roll again. Sorry, audience, we just had some technical problems. But Grahame, I believe you were talking about the differences maybe between the approach taken to somewhere like Timor-Leste and Australia. You know, a one size fits all approach doesn't work.
That doesn't work.
Yep.
It's never worked. You got to tailor management to the local situation.
Yep.
And that's particularly complex in Timor-Leste. It's not impossible. You've just got to be very straight, very honest, and be sensitive to cultural sensitivities and try to work out how to get the best option out for the people of Timor-Leste.
Yep.
You know, because the last thing you want is for them to invest money in something that's a crappy idea, you know, that doesn't have a chance of working.
When they don't have a lot of money.
They don't have a lot of
in the
money.
first place.
And like, my guess is that the whole wildlife department has a budget less than we spend on Darwin Harbour.
Yep.
You know, so it's no good saying, well, you need this and you need that and you need this and you need that. Well, I mean, it doesn't necessarily work in that context. And that's the part that gets fumbled up often with
is that by politicians or who's that by?
It's not necessarily by politicians, but it's by government. You know, these things get institutionalised.
Right.
Like croc management here becomes institutionalised, and they do things a certain way, and often they don't. To me, don't stop and assess. Well, okay, do we need to change the way we're doing some things?
Sure.
Or do we just keep doing it? Because, as you know, it all depends on budget. And if you got the budget last year, the best predictor of a budget for any program in government is what it was last year. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's not a sciencey sort of based approach. You know, the science-based approach should be your own worst critic. And you should be looking. R&D still has a very big role to play.
Well, it should be needs-based, shouldn't it? Like you need the
Well,
funding.
you just need to be questioning all the time.
Right.
It's not a matter of pleasing people. It's a matter of trying to get the right answer all the time. The context is changing. Nothing's constant. The whole context is changing. Where the territory gets under attack by animal rights activists over the crocodiles. Well, you know, animal rights activists have their role to play in the concrete jungles down south or something, but it doesn't fit in too well with an Aboriginal way of living.
Sure.
And once they work out how to fit it in with all due respect to 31% of the people in the Northern Territory, well, then that's the time to start talking to them. Because you can't bring in all these paradigms that make everything that Aboriginal people do substandard or something.
Yeah.
So, but this is where the territory itself has got to be strong. You know, we can be strong. We're only tiny population. We don't get necessarily fair recognition, but we pick our politicians. God love them. You know, like it's a hell of a job from a small number of people. And they, by and large, in my opinion, do a fantastic job, you know. But we're small and we suffer from this quantum, you know, and I don't know how we're going to break that in the long run. Being in the tourist industry, you know, you see it's been going down more often than it's been going up.
Right.
And you know, like it's cheaper to fly from a family of 4 from Sydney to London, have a week's holiday and come back, and it is to go to Darwin. Well, if everyone thinks that's fair, how can Darwin possibly grow and consolidate and get. We need a bigger population to get the infrastructure that we need. And it's, like, what a great place we live in. You know, I was talking to someone just yesterday that in Sydney, it drives an hour and a half through the traffic to work and an hour and a half home through the traffic. 3 hours in the traffic a day. It's like being, an actor in the Gladiator film. You're out on the road.
Yeah.
No wonder you're a bit tired when you get home. Well, here you can get anywhere in 15 minutes, and we don't have all those stresses. So many people go bush. Like to go bush. They love to be able to go out and catch fish, and God damn, it's a part that people in the cities have trouble understanding. This sort of livelihood, a little bit frontiery. It's something that's on so many people's bucket lists.
Yeah.
To do this, but I tell you, the transport to get here, it's just an absolute killer. How can you? If you have a relative that is seriously ill in July, I went through this, and the airline company said, "Don't worry, sir, we've got compassionate fares." Thank God for that. I need to get 5 people to Sydney. It's $2,000 single to Sydney in July. I said, "Thank you." That's very compassionate. I put them all in a car and they drove down. These are the costs of living here, but they are costs. We're a big country. We've got a resource base like a third world country and a quality of life like a first world country. Mm-hmm. And Bob Hawke pointed that out actually in the introduction to Our Common Future, way back. And he's right. And we've got to somehow accept that. We're not like Singapore that has everyone within a stone's throw of each other. Like, a big section of our population is spread over vast kilometres. Now, if we want to focus everything on the people living in the cities, and I think we're 86% urban now in Australia,
Eastern Seaboard.
Yeah, it's that's great, but somehow this travel thing has got to, they've got to work out some way. I keep thinking they should lift the excise on the fuel in Darwin, aircraft fuel.
Yep.
So the cheapest place in Australia to refuel your aircraft's Darwin.
I think that's a great idea.
Well, so what? They're gonna lose a bit of income from the tax revenue, but then planes would
land here.
It would, and then you're not supporting some new company with so much. You're saying, right, here's a general thing. And one of the things that could help Darwin enormously, if one way of helping it, is if the cost of fuel was down.
Right.
Certainly with aircraft, I think it could be important. I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but you need something like that makes it economically viable for people to come to Darwin. Not now. I mean, try to get your family up here, and you can't. The cost of tickets is so great, and
Yeah, well, it's cost prohibitive. So is that going to take a change of government to?
No, I don't think it will. I don't think both governments have had a chance to deal with this problem
over the
decades,
years, yep.
and neither of them. I don't think it is. It's a matter.
So is it technological innovation or is it
policy?
I
don't think it's technology. It's a political decision that's got to be made in Canberra, and the people in Queensland will be saying, "Oh, well, we want that too," or the people in Western Australia, "We want that too."
Sure.
Maybe they deserve it, but they should test it somewhere.
Right.
Like test it in Darwin and see whether it works. And if it doesn't work, well, okay, we're back to square one. But if it works, do something bold. Like this is a truly wicked problem.
Mm-hmm.
We have a vast area of land with a tiny, tiny, tiny population. And a lot of our primary production in mining and agriculture is all taking place outside the cities. And that's the resource economy. That's the resource economy that's putting money into the government. a lot of which is then spent on the social economy.
Right.
You know, and you've got to have a social economy. I don't have a problem with that. But the problem with the social economy to me is that it's very easy today to come up with a social problem. Like, how many social problems are there in the world today? 7 or 8 billion people, like 2 billion of them live in poverty. And you know, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, what's the primary one? Poverty, you know. Like, there are 10 million social problems where we'll promote a social problem, or some people will promote a social problem. The next thing, all the people in the city believe it to be true and needs to be prioritised amongst the other 999,999 other social problems that exist.
Yep.
And so how we rein that in and say, yep, it's a social problem, and when we're more financially equipped, we'll try to deal with it. We can't deal with it on the basis of who promotes it.
Right.
You know, the ABC is a classic example, you know, I mean, heavens above. They promote so many social causes, you think it's like the Socialist Republic of the ABC or something. You know, something happens to one person somewhere and it's, whoa, outrage.
Yeah.
You know, like this is, it's a very simple formula. See, you use the media, social media or the formal media to create moral outrage about something.
Sure.
Then you identify a clearly defined enemy, the person responsible. And then the politicians don't want to be seen to be immoral.
Right.
And they get threatened.
Yep.
In other words, they don't support it.
They won't get re-elected.
They're going to make sure they're labelled as being immoral.
Right.
So the next thing, you've got a knee-jerk reaction, basically. It seems perfectly plausible. Like it just wasn't right that little Billy, you know, got into trouble for wearing his thongs at school, you know. But should that dominate the national news? You know, is that what we're really about? So there's a lot of how we get this balance between the resource economy that's providing a lot of the money and the social economy that is an endless thing. And, you know, I often think to operate in the social economy, you need 2 bottles of red wine, 3 glasses, 3 people sit down just like this, and you work out the next problem.
Right.
And then you get people like yourself, and they promote the thing on the podcast. You know, Christ, you know, crocodiles should have pink underpants on. You know, it's absolutely obscene that tourists have to travel up and down a river and crocodiles are lying on the bank without underpants on. And the next thing, there's a major initiative to catch all the crocodiles and put pink underpants on them.
Right.
You know that's the way it works. There doesn't seem to be any valve to turn it off. It's about who can promote the most plausible thing. There's plenty of social problems. There's millions of them. You know, which ones are we going to pick over the other ones? Like I notice now the domestic violence is a terrible thing.
Yep.
But I heard this morning on the news that someone's just pointed out that for Aboriginal women, the rate of domestic violence is 12 times. Why is it taking so long for that to come out in the front? Because nobody wants to point, you know, nobody wants to point the finger in case they're considered to be racist or something like this. But you're not going to solve the problem unless you identify it. It should be completely impartial. So, you know, I've got, I don't know, I see the world a little bit differently than a lot of people, I think.
Well, I hear you talk about ruralism. And is that, you know, is there some sort of disconnect, say, between those in the rural areas to those, you know, almost our rulers in the sort of in the more urban areas? Is that how?
I think it's
a divide we need to bridge?
That's 100% because what's happened in 1960, the world population was 30% urban and 70% rural.
Right.
Today, it's 65% urban and 35% rural.
I didn't know that.
No, that's globally.
Right.
And in Australia, we're 86% urban.
Wow. So
it's
more
14%.
It's even more extreme.
It's even more extreme. So the political power
It's concentrated.
is in the cities.
Yeah, sure.
And It's just
And they don't have a connection with the people that are putting the food on their plate.
that's all gone.
Yep.
That's all gone. You
So-
know, and it's so easy when you've got an audience, a voting audience, like we are a country where everyone has to vote. If these issues are complicated, the balance between rural and urban, you know, food production and things like this.
Yep.
You can't expect the average voter to be across all these things.
No.
You know, so I don't know how we handle it because it's getting worse and worse and worse. Like, you know, the lifeblood of this nation, like, look at fishing. You know, fishing is an honourable. You know, I think fishermen have had an honourable role to play in society forever.
Yep.
And now, especially in Queensland, they're just turning against the fishermen, you know, and because it's not popular. Like, people don't care. Yet in rural coastal communities, that little fishing community is very important. Now, it's more difficult to manage. It's easy to manage it from, say, Sydney if you have all the, you know, if you manage the whole thing from Sydney, you just get rid of all these small operators and bring in some big operator,
Yep.
and you know.
Sure.
But the community side is lost.
Yep.
Like I saw
Same
just
thing
the
with
other
mining.
day. Same with mining. Mining is something that okay, we know from history that mining without environmental considerations can have some devastating impacts.
Yep.
But a whole lot of mining is done with very good environment. You know, if you want to see real environmentalists with mining, go to one of the Mining Industry Council meetings. You find 500.
Yep.
You know, they're probably the biggest employer of environmental scientists in the country, and they are striving to find better ways of doing things. But see, that doesn't make the news. The news is something went wrong here.
Right.
And 99 things went right, one thing went wrong.
Yep.
And suddenly the wrong thing, you're judged by what goes wrong.
Yep.
And not by what goes right.
Yeah.
And that I don't know how you handle that. It's what we have to deal with today. But you know, I saw in Botswana where they have elephants. You know, they've conserved their elephants incredibly well. There's now more elephants than the carrying capacity.
Wow.
They're causing all sorts of problems. And trophy hunting is something that brings in a lot of income to the local people, and it all works well. But some of the countries are totally opposed to trophy hunting, just imagery. Doesn't matter about the elephant dying, really. It's how could they possibly do that? Well, they do. So the president of Botswana said to Germany, we'll solve your problem. We'll donate you 20,000 elephants to Germany, and then you can save your own elephants.
Problem solved.
Problem solved,
Yeah.
isn't it? That's what I think they should do with the great white sharks up in Ballina and these areas. Like, instead of catching them and putting a tag on and releasing them, just take them down to
Send
Sydney
them.
Harbour. Put them in Sydney Harbour, and then people can save their own great white sharks. Because the people making the decisions are distant
Right.
from the people putting up with it.
So it's other countries interfering in the matters
Well,
of...
it's just somehow it's this urban-rural type thing. Like,
Yep.
people in Germany, for example, I suspect, they don't really understand what happens in Zimbabwe. They don't, you know, they just, maybe they ought to take some groups of people, just working people, and
Yep.
dump them in Botswana for a while and take them around and let them see what happens. Because my view would be, whoa, they'd be quite surprised because they're making decisions, political decisions are being made on the basis of some sort of assessment of what the public's going to vote for, because today that's what's happening. You know, like everything's poll politics. It doesn't matter whether you've got the right answer. It's whether you got the answer that the public...
popular.
which is the popular... Like, that's a pretty dangerous thing.
It is.
It's a dangerous thing where science and evidence-based and all this stuff comes into it, because sometimes politicians have got to be very strong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they've got to understand the problem and understand why we're doing this and the long-term consequence of it. It's a hard thing to do, I think. But
Yeah.
I hate to see us just follow, you know, Sydney and Melbourne, and they all follow the US, and the whole thing just snowballs. Everyone's following everyone else around.
Well, do we need more autonomy then? Would you like to see the
so.
territory, you know?
I think we need a bigger population.
Right.
For sure.
So that's where you see being the problem solver, for lack of a better term.
Well, yeah, it's a funny thing that I must be one of the only people that's examined some of this stuff, because I've just got an interest in this, but I mapped out the indices of business confidence against the indices of interstate tourism that we were getting from Crocodiles Park. They're a pretty good index. You know, we've been keeping them for 30 years. And I always assumed that when the tourist season was good and a lot of people came, that business confidence
Rose.
rose.
Right. No?
Goes the other way.
Wow.
Business confidence all occurs 6 months to a year before the tourism occurs. So if business confidence declines, tourism will decline. And if business confidence increases, tourism will increase.
Right.
And that, when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. But so the problem with tourism is it's intimately linked to business confidence. Mm-hmm. If there's a lot of development going on, people are coming up in the north and their visitors come up and they bring their family up and they, you know, everything happens. Mm. If there's no real economic activity or it's declining, it's very low now, then it's very difficult to see how tourism is going to pick up. Our biggest source of tourism is interstate tourism.
Okay.
And at the moment, my guess is it's down 15 to 20% on last year.
Wow.
You know, so
that's a significant.
It's hugely significant. You know, for us it is at Crocodiles Park. Like for a government tourist operation, of course, makes no difference.
Yeah.
Everyone gets paid the same. Everyone gets paid the same. They, you know, more money goes out to. You know, it's shielded. Mm-hmm. The government has the information to really bury into tourism and really start to work out what's going wrong.
Right.
You know? Because if it's business confidence, as these figures tended to suggest, but that, you know, I'd be the first to say that needs to be checked more thoroughly. Mm-hmm. That's a profoundly important thing, because if business confidence is going down, then we're on a one-way street. It's going to get less and less and less and less. So it's becomes more and more difficult for anyone in the private sector to operate something that is involved with tourism. And if you look at the investment that you should put into a tourist attraction, you know, you should buy a 4-bedroom elevated house, convert it to a tourist thing, charge $25 and employ 3 people. And that's about the economics of a private investment in tourism that's going to be sustainable and perhaps make a profit.
Right.
When you do something like we've done at Crocodiles Park, where you put millions and millions of dollars into it, and you keep thinking, it's going to really go up. You know, the only other boom thing was when the only other big boom was back when the East Timor thing was on. Everyone was staging through Darwin. A lot of people from the UN were based in Darwin.
Right.
Tourism really boomed then, but you can't very well create an international war situation in order to build tourism. You know, when that finished, then SARS and ANZET, the thing went right down to the bottom. Certainly over that period, tourism's been declining much more than it's been increasing. Mm-hmm. So there's really need for a lot of basic research into tourism.
Right.
So we're really well informed, but I see the university here as potentially playing a huge role, in objectively analysing a lot of these, what's going on with tourism, monitoring here, not some telephone survey from Canberra, but actually monitoring what's going on. And the same as I see a huge role for the university in with crocodiles. It should be a central hub. Look, the next generation of people are going to have to deal with this problem. And the university is so well established to become a hub, get some of the world-leading people in, invest in it. And there's a lot of things, research is such an important thing. Like sometimes government departments don't like independent research because, their budget is institutionalised. But in the long run, it's going to be better for everybody if everybody starts to critically assess what they're doing and just as a check. Like science is not about making out what you're doing is working. Science is about disproving things.
Right.
And if you can't disprove it, then, well, maybe it's right.
Right. Testing a hypothesis.
It's testing a hypothesis.
Yep.
But if you don't test it, if you only find evidence of what a good job we're doing, yeah. There's people finding evidence to support things they want to believe all over the place. So I'm all for science, research, innovation, playing a much bigger role. Like one time we had a research and innovation committee, a relatively modest budget, and it was able to give grants to various researchers that were doing things on the basis that they got a bigger grant. In other words, we might allocate 30 grand to a project if they got the bigger grant they were aiming for. It might be 130 or 150 or 200. That was an incredibly successful thing. I think they ended up spending something like, with the university in Menzies, I think they spent about, over 5 years, something like 900,000. And I think the return was like 14 or 15 million, most of which went into salaries. So they got a lot of it back through payroll tax anyway.
Okay.
That's sort of investment that works. But
good ROI.
These things just change politically. Someone comes in, someone's in power, they don't like someone, they just shut it off.
Yep.
We've got to get over that. We've got a huge... There was a legacy in the north of, real men drive graders, Anyone in a white lab coat, be careful of them.
Right.
But trust me, that research and science and innovation are real potential
Game changers.
For the north. It's not going to happen with people's, this is the way we'll go.
Yep.
It's not going to happen with making decisions.
Yep.
Look, anyone can make decisions. They've been doing it all through history. Some of them are right, some of them are wrong. You really need to have evidence-based decisions. You need assessment. You need independent assessment.
So would you like to see government maybe funding a bit more independent research? Is that sort of the way forward in your mind? Or is it just because it's government funded? I
guess I see that the government should look at research as an economy in its own right.
Right.
We've got a lot of researchers here in Darwin in all different fields. I don't know how many there is altogether, but there must be hundreds. They're all either using government money or federal government money or outside money, or they're visiting from overseas. It's an economy in its own right. Mm-hmm. And if they forget anything, if they forget everything else, this is one segment of the economy that is capable of bringing in probably twice as much money into the community, much of which ends up getting spent on salaries. So it goes back into the shops and the supermarkets and everything else. you've got to look at, I think, research as an economy in its own right within the Northern Territory, and do what you can. And we have our university here. For years we didn't have a university here. Had to operate from overseas. The only reason we started privately, there was no university here.
Right.
And we were involved in the very start with the university to encourage it, and it's done a lot of things to encourage the university, which I think has huge potential. But there's only certain things that you can probably focus on in the Northern Territory in terms of research that is more competitive than doing the same research in other institutions elsewhere.
Right.
Look, it's no good us starting something that is going to be able to be done twice as fast and half the cost
cheaper,
in Melbourne.
Yep. Right.
You know, we've got to pick things that are uniquely territory.
Mm-hmm.
Like crocodiles are obviously one.
Yep.
Tropical tourism is obviously one. Tropical health, obviously one. To me, tropical fisheries should be a major sell, because the rest of the world is trying to work out how to fish economically and sustainably. Mm-hmm. And here we are, there's vast areas of coastline with good management of our fisheries resources. We could be a training place for fisheries students coming through, and you know, but we've got to. There's not that many things that I see that we've got a really natural advantage. Like, I always thought one of the really wonderful things that was happening in Alice Springs at one time was this group that were building technologies that were suited to community life.
Right.
It sounds silly, but community life is very different than just the average life in Darwin.
You're talking remote community
Remote
life.
communities. Yep. And this group, I remember they developed, it sounds silly, but a sort of stainless steel indestructible toilet.
Right.
Now, things like that was, to me, a giant... I don't know what happened to that organisation, but it was... Guy Bruce Walker was in charge of it for a long time, mm-hmm. and I thought it was just a real switched-on guy that was thinking outside the square. But community life is different.
Yep.
You know, like Aboriginal communities are different.
Building structures that are going to stand the test of time out in a remote community.
Well, that's right.
Yep.
That's right. They might cost more.
Yep.
But then don't cost more when there's no breakage.
Yeah, over the life of
that's
sure.
Right.
Yep.
And they're sort of those types of innovation things, like the whole...
And building houses that are suitable to remote community life, and that sort of thing.
That's like you'd think that would be right up the top of
the list of priorities.
When you have a lot of these other problems, like hearing problems, in the communities, they're very large. You've got all sorts of people being funded to do this stuff. But one of the big problems is there's so many people living in, they build a conventional 4-bedroom house and 20 people live in it.
Yep.
And it doesn't work. I don't know. Like, someone could probably tell us that maybe you need a simpler, more robust thing where you can get a whole lot more houses built, and then sure you can add to them or do things later on. But then you get over that public health problem too of having smaller family groups living together. There's got to, I don't know. There must be people obviously working on these things. So I'm just, it's not my field at all. But I do just cringe when I think of some of the difficulties that are there. They're all things that research and innovation could.
Yep.
You got to be prepared to try things.
And common sense too, I think.
Common sense
gets lost in it, a lot of it.
They're truly wicked problems.
Mm-hmm.
Wicked problems have so many operating variables that you can't really solve them with reductionist thinking. You can't go down variable for variable. you've got to really try something new, that puts your best guess on stuff.
Sure.
And then you can sort of learn in big steps. Now,
Yep.
there's a risk involved. There's a political risk involved
Yep.
because some politician has eventually got to sign off on it. It may work, it may not work. But other countries do it. Like Finland, not that long ago, I thought it was brilliant. They decided the homeless situation was there was a good chance that part of that was that the homeless people just didn't have the money to live anywhere. So that they designed a political thing for a year, and they ran it for a year, and the Prime Minister said they weren't going to make a decision until the results come into the year where they gave the homeless people quite an income, where they'd be able to rent somewhere or do something.
Yep.
Now, at the end of a year, they decided that it hadn't worked. And so they didn't proceed with that. I don't know what they proceeded with. But like that is really experimental policy is the sort of, I think it's the only thing you can do. This idea, you come up with a policy and then you make out everything's right even if it's going wrong. Well, I mean, hello? Like,
Yeah.
what? That's not evidence-based. That's wishful thinking. It's like the Disneyland side of life. The most policies are wicked problems. They're an attempt. And when you implement a policy like that, you should really have key performance indices where you're tracking it all the time and objectively, and working out whether it has achieved its goals, whether it is achieving its goals, or whether it's not. Because the trouble is if the budget is there, the people getting the budget will be forever obviously trying to make out it's working. Because their employment's involved in the social economy. Their employment's linked to the fact that it's working. They're not, and you've got contract positions now. So you've got departments sometimes being run by basically a consultant. And he's only got one client, and that's the minister. So is he going to go to the minister and say, something's not working?
Yeah.
Maybe. Some will, some won't.
Well, the Kavanagh shade structure, I was reading in a story today, it's designed to bring down the temperature of Kavanagh Street. And I think they weren't even capturing temperature data on that. So if that's sort of a canary in the coal mine for sort of the rest of the way our society is. Well,
on the one hand, like, it's a bold decision to do something like that.
I think it was a great idea in theory,
but
just poorly executed.
I agree with you.
And then monitored.
You should have said, okay, this is how we're going to assess this. What's going? Like, it took them ages to get something to grow on it.
Yeah,
but the question was, it should have been objectively monitored.
Yep.
There's nothing wrong with that. Like, if it doesn't live up to its expectations, well, then you might have to change something, or you might have to put a solid roof on it, or something. I don't know. But if you don't, you do these things and don't measure it, you've got a problem.
Yep.
Now, to measure it costs you money, of course. As soon as you are going to assess things objectively, it's going to cost you money. But that's money well spent, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
On policy. Like, policy evaluation is a complex thing too.
Do you have any advice for the next generation of zoologists looking to get into
well, I think
the line of work you're in?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough line. Like, a lot of the stuff I spent my life working on has been overseas, not here. And
what sort of places has it taken you?
Oh, wow. I worked in China and Thailand and Cambodia and the Philippines and Singapore and Malaysia and Cuba and Venezuela and Colombia. And, I've been lucky to be able to go into a lot of places and mainly places with crocodiles, obviously. And I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about different people, different cultures, and different governments, different, like, they're all different. There's no, there's no governmental system to me that is actually 100% right and 100% wrong.
Yep.
They're all context specific, and so it's sometimes hard to. It's hard to draw the lessons out. Like Cuba, for example, we spent 10 years in Cuba working on a big program, and I was very hesitant to go into Cuba at first because, like everybody else, you hear all the bad stuff that comes out of the US, and that's a complex political issue in its own right. But when I got there, there was so much that was good. That, okay, there's problems, but it's not like a police state or anything. God, everybody's educated. Everybody has access to medicine. They've got more doctors per head of population than pretty well anyone else in the world.
Yep.
If there's a danger, it tends to promote hypochondria.
Right.
But the main thing to me is that Cuba was the first country in that region to totally liberate women.
Right.
Well, the women are just independent and strong, and they occupy, serious positions. And in that part of the world, that all happened, 1959, 1960s, way before these big movements started around the world. There was no drugs when I was there to speak of, or very little. And I just thought, wow, there's a lot of good things there. Now, they're hard things because the revolution was 1959, 1960, and how that was won, I'll never quite know because it was a strange thing. There's a lot of success. There's a lot of interesting things that are successful in Cuba.
Yep.
And very smart and intelligent, very worldly people. A lot of them travelled a huge amount. And so I felt very comfortable there.
Right.
Mind you, we were fighting big battles because it was to do with sea turtles and trade, and it was to do with CITES. And had it been just Cuba, I'm sure we'd have won. Had it been just sea turtles, we'd have won. But Cuba and sea turtles is just pushing the international envelope further than one could reasonably expect to be successful. But we tried hard and learned a lot.
But when you say you're fighting, who was it you were actually fighting against?
The thing is, sea turtles is a funny area in as much as the sea turtles were heavily depleted all over the place. Like even in Australia, we had meatworks basically with sea turtles. But here, they're well and truly recovered. Like we didn't in the north, up here. Like our sea turtle populations have never been really seriously depleted. But I guess the sea turtle conservation issue is all about endangered species and doing things to save species, and even when things recover, it's very difficult for people to mouth the words, it's not a conservation problem anymore.
Okay.
It's a matter of how many we're going to have and where we're going to have them, and it's very difficult with crocodiles, because if sea turtles ate people, I think it'd be very different.
Right.
If they crawled up the beach and grabbed a couple of swimmers or something and dragged them off, things would change. Crocodiles, fortunately, people were very much more pragmatic, and we just had a big meeting here in Darwin, the IUCN Crocodile Specialist Group meeting, a fantastic meeting. I think there's something like 250 people here in Darwin. This is the third or fourth big international meeting we've had here in Darwin. And they raised a lot of money for conservation research, and there's lots of interesting things on different programs and different research, and it was they're different. the crocodile specialist group, having been, I chaired it for 20 years, but was deeply involved in it for the 20 years before that, is just different. It's just different. People pay their own way to get there. They save up to get there. They might be a student from Brazil or you know, and when they get there, everything's organised to make sure they have a really nice time. Mm-hmm. They really enjoy it. And they go back and they meet everybody and they make all sorts of connections and they go back. And people working on crocs are working in some swamp in the middle of nowhere, you know, and they must often sit there thinking, Christ, does anyone really care? You know,
getting
it's
bitten by
hard.
mozzies and
we brought in a system where if you're doing postgraduate work anywhere in the world working on crocs, you could apply to the crocodile specialist group. We had a separate little fund that would give people $1,000 US, you know, if it was approved. And that was for you.
Yep.
Not for your university, that was for you. If you wanted to spend it on your project, you could. If you wanted to spend it on rum, you could. It was our way of saying thank you for working on crocodiles, which is often a lot harder than working on other species. And that's operated now for like 10 years. I think we've supported 250 projects in 40 countries. And out of that has come a really high number of people that now have senior positions in the CSG and they've gone on. That's the sort of way we've operated. You know, the strength. Crocodiles don't save themselves. It's people that save crocodiles. Mm-hmm. It's people that manage crocodiles. Yeah, crocodiles are floating around doing what they've been doing for the last 200 million years. They can't save themselves. Mm. If the public turns against crocodiles, there's not much chance for crocodiles. It's all about people. Mm-hmm. And the best thing you can have in any country is a champion. That's the key thing. If you can get one person at least, that is in a country that has got a very objective view of what's going on. You don't want someone that wants to follow in the footsteps of, you know, social media person. You need people who are going to get things done. Mm-hmm. And there's some remarkable people that sometimes they've got really high social media presence and they just do a remarkable job.
Yep.
Other times they're top-notch scientists, you know, and so and then you've got industry people, and you've got farming people, you've got everybody involved. So in the crocodile specialist group, if you want to know something about the industry, you can go to the industry members, or you can go to these members or those members. And, you know, these crocodiles are in about 90 countries or something. So it's getting the world situation, you need everybody involved. So it turned out to be a big group, the biggest group, I think, in the IUCN, one of the most active groups. And everyone has a bloody good time when they all get together. They mightn't agree with each other all the time. They might have different philosophies and different axes to grind. Everyone's got axes to grind over money. You know, they expect somehow the crocodile specialist group to support the individuals, where the specialist group's main job is to keep the specialist group going,
right,
and to help people raise money. Mm-hmm. But you know, it's not a funding body, and everyone gets a lot out of that. And so it's a good model. It's a good model. It's an inclusive model, and younger people can come in and mix shoulders with experienced veterans. I like it. You know, so the people now running that are excellent people. And so I expect that'll go on and on and on and on.
Fantastic. Just finishing, how has the territory changed in your eyes since you arrived in the 70s? Is it still, you know, do you still sort of see it as a place of opportunity? Is there things we need to work on?
I think it's definitely a place of opportunity. But you know, if I had to tattoo across everyone's face one word, I'd say innovation.
Right. That's what's going to drive us forward.
But it's got to. Look, we're so different than Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, you know, we're just a different place.
Yep.
And we've got to think outside the square.
Yep.
We've got to be able to try things. We've got to be more experimental. I think the Territory has a wonderful future. You know, when I track back through my ancestry, I don't know how many great-grandfathers, but one was an English soldier that was at Melville Island in 1829.
Wow. Was that at Fort...
For a year.
Was that Fort Dundas or was that...
Well, it must be just when they were going from Fort Dundas to Port Essington.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Abraham Chapman, his name, was an English soldier. And I thought, well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because there's probably not that many people that can track back that far.
No.
But we still have the same problem here, the tyranny of distance.
Yep.
And what I mean, you can jump up and down and do whatever you like. You can build the Taj Mahal. If no one comes to town, well, then you're buggered.
Yep.
You can't grow that little industry. But that little industry is dependent on business confidence.
Yep.
So we need to be able to crank up business. And I don't know how we actually do that, but we need to get good advice on how to do it, because at the moment it's not good. You know, it's not good nationally, of course. You know, there's all sorts of problems. But here, the tyranny of distance is killing us. It's just killing us.
And so that's one of the biggest hurdles.
Oh, I think one of the biggest hurdles
biggest.
we've got is actually, you know, the tyranny of distance.
Right.
And it's sort of become like, I don't know, it must have been always like this in Australia. You know, there were rural people and there were urban people. And maybe it changed. I always think that the First World War was probably a pivotal point, because urban and rural people were both together, side by side, in the bloody trenches, dealing with a problem that none of them had to deal with before. And they appreciated each other for their various skills, and then that led then through, you know, the Depression into the Second World War. Where again, they're all together, and you know, rural people have certain sorts of skills that you know, they can fix any damn thing, or they're innovative.
Yep.
And urban people have all these other skills, you know, their social skills in particular. They're funny, they've got great senses of humour. And I think that period did a lot towards moulding the country together.
Okay.
But we're back now to where we were, I think.
More divided.
Well, we are divided. You know, hello. You know, Darwin. Yeah. Up near Singapore somewhere, you know.
And with the rise of social media as well, it seems to have, you know, exacerbated that problem and made it worse. Even though we should be almost more connected than we've ever been, but you know, we've got a, you know, what do they call it? Is it a pandemic of loneliness or something like that? It's, you know.
Well, there's areas about living up here that are tough, you know, but there's other areas about living up here that are just fantastic, you know. And most people spend their life avoiding tough situations, but then tough situations test people. You know, a lot of people come to the forefront when they're faced with a tough situation. I think, you know, Darwin is really quite a unique place. There's things we've got to deal with pragmatically and quickly, because we've got a lot that's very good, and we've got a lot that's very bad.
A lot of challenges.
Somehow we've got to deal with them pragmatically. It can't all be done on the basis of local politics. You know, we've got to, you know, start doing things, you know. That's all politicians, I think. You know, look, I admire greatly all the politicians, because it's pretty hard to step up to that job. You know, no one's going to thank you unless you win a lotto or something. So it's a tough call. You know, these things. Democracy seems to have problems when you've got a small population base and a big public service.
Okay.
I think, you know, because they're, you know, I don't know, we need the best advice we can get, We need, the politicians need the best advice they can get on various things. Mm-hmm. And I'm quite confident in the future.
Yeah.
It's just taking a bit longer to be realised.
Right.
I won't be here to see it. Yeah.
Well, on that note, usually at the end of a podcast, we like to give our guests an opportunity to just spruik anything that they might have going on. I don't know if you've got anything with Crocodiles Park or WMI that you'd like to promote.
Oh, well,
coming into tourist season.
Yeah, well, Crocodiles Park is of course, one of the main things that I've got an interest in that sustains me up here now, because I'm basically retiring from a lot of this stuff. I'm over it a bit.
Right. Yeah.
Like Crocodiles Park is a family thing. Like we built it. We've got certain ethical and moral things that are built into it, and it's different. It's not government operated. It's not government anything, and so we're very proud of it. People enjoy it. It's if you haven't been there for a while, go visit it.
All right. Well, you heard it here, folks. Go and frequent private enterprise, support local business, get around to Crocodiles Park. Professor Grahame Webb, it's been fascinating, mate. I appreciate you taking the time out to come and talk with us and promote crocodiles in the territory, mate. Thanks very much.
Real pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.